Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation from the IOQ. Today's presentation is by Daniel Jones of Dtec. Daniel is a training manager for the organisation. Daniel will present an interactive discussion where he will outline best practice around drug and alcohol screening and offer insight into current police statistics on drug and drink driving. Thank you, Daniel.
Perfect. Thank you, Harry, for that little introduction there. So just double check everyone can see my screens and we're good to go. Perfect. Okay, so yeah, welcome everyone and welcome to this little forum and kind of webinar just discussing alcohol and drugs in the organization and really looking at, as Harry said, best practice. So are you doing enough as managers or potential owners of organizations to make sure that we are creating a safe environment for our workforce? So quick introduction from myself. As Harry said, my main role within Dtec International is the training manager. So I oversee and head up our training department within Dtec, spending a lot of time either on device handling, but also spreading, drug and alcohol awareness sessions such as this. And I also spend a lot of time, working, developing and delivering bespoke training solutions to support all of our businesses' individual needs. It's very much not a case of one size fits all. So we try to work with, our SMEs all the way through to our blue chip companies that we work with. Not only that, but I also spend a lot of time, tailoring proposals, drafting policies, and obviously providing a lot of educational resources that help to assist our businesses to implement a robust but an active drug and alcohol screening solution. So not just having it there in the background, but also making sure we have it to actively call upon and make sure we're really reducing those collisions, or causes for concern within the organization. So we're just going to spend some time now looking at some of the work we do. So for those of you that aren't aware, Dtec International as a company work with all 43 police forces in England and Wales and in Police Scotland as well as their own separate entity. So we work closely with them and we get a lot of statistics coming back from these police forces. So why are we discussing, and you might be thinking, why are we discussing this subject and why now specifically? So we're greatly shocked by the amount of statistics and the figures that we are seeing coming back, especially considering COVID-19 and the national lockdowns that we've seen, with some police forces seeing 2 to 3 times that of drug driving versus drink driving. As you can see there, some of our police forces during December 2020, which you'd all consider is a heavy drink drive kind of time of the year with Christmas and parties and work parties, things of that nature, and yet we're still seeing 2 to 3 times that of drugs across just 3 of the forces highlighted there. Moving on from that, we then had North Wales, who actually recently published their drink and drug drive arrest data for the period of March to July. And with that, we've been able to really look at a correlation. How has that changed over the past few years? So as you can see there, drug drive being only slightly above drink drive in 2019, but then during 2020, which obviously when the first lockdown was, we saw that increase substantially again to 1.5 to 2 times drugs versus drink, and then continue to see that trend grow into 2021. Obviously seeing a greater impact of drug driving and drink drive arrests. Okay, and we'll talk about some percentages and increases that we've seen over the past 2 years or so as a result of the pandemic. Okay, and are people using drugs and alcohol as a crutch? And we'll deep dive into some further statistics around that. So again, just highlighting the shift that we saw. So again, this highlight of more drugs than drinks. So during 2019, here's 3 police forces in England that we work very closely with and provide a lot of in-depth detail and statistics. So Essex Police were seeing, again, more drugs than drink. West Yorkshire, who've always been historically a heavy drink drive force compared to drug drive, we're seeing more drink from them versus drugs. And then Merseyside Police, again, more drugs than drink. However, how did that change during the first half of 2020, which all of you can remember was our first full lockdown? Okay, well, we're seeing Essex again 2 to 3 times out of drugs versus drink. West Yorkshire, for the first time in the history of working with us, we're seeing more drugs than drink. And again, Merseyside police 2 to 3 times out of drugs versus drink. And I guess the shocking thing from that is that 50% of those in the Merseyside statistics were those driving at or for work. So they were currently driving for work, or come Monday need their license for work. So for want of a better phrase, they are professional drivers, and we're still seeing 50% of those being arrested for drugs or drink. So really shocking in itself, and hopefully showing you and highlighting the issue that we are seeing day to day. And we'll talk about how in a bit that can correlate across into obviously the workplace setting. So first and foremost, and something that we need to look at is, you know, the prevalence of drug and alcohol dependency by sex in England, okay, and by gender. So statistically, men are significantly more likely to experience drug and alcohol dependency, and there are, you know, a plethora of factors as to why this is the case. For instance, the difference in the way men and women deal with emotional distress can be one. You know, societal norms. So what is socially acceptable for a man versus a woman? So there's often that, you know, the ideology of if you're a man, you need to man up, okay, and deal with it, okay? And there's a lot of awareness and mental health that's now obviously coming to the forefront as in terms of well-being and staff well-being. But it is common for a man to turn to drugs and alcohol as a way of coping with these different social norms and factors that we've just discussed. Okay, but it can also work the other way around, whereby, you know, an individual develops a mental health issue first as a result of an addiction to that drug and alcohol. So they're not using the drugs and alcohol to cope, but are actually developed it because of that mental health issue. And then obviously we see that deteriorate because of the effects that drugs and alcohol both have on someone's well-being, but also social life, personal life, things of that nature, work life. So it could be argued that, you know, staff, whether it be drivers or machinery operators, are more at risk due to the nature of the work that they do, you know, whether it's shift patterns or time spent alone in their own thoughts, the work pressures, but also the opportunity to be proactive around well-being takes careful considerations by yourselves and also your colleagues that you work with. And especially in, you know, the current climate, these effects are exacerbated. So as we see, you know, COVID-19 start to unwind and obviously the restrictions ease and things of that nature, have people been turning to drugs or alcohol as a crutch of dealing with the past 2 years? Okay, and are we going to see that link into the workplace? So whether that's, you know, financial worries of the individuals, whether that's relationship concerns, you know, as we've already said, if you've got any drivers that are away on the road, okay, for long periods of time while their partner is at home, single-handedly, you know, working themselves, maybe working from home, plus looking after the kids, especially over the summer, okay, or homeschooling, if we have to isolate, things of that nature, they're doing that by themselves, okay? Maybe there's worries about the future, job security, things of this nature, and therefore it's much more likely that a male will turn to drugs or alcohol as a way of coping with this emotional distress, and it's something we need to be aware of. And if trends follow as displayed on the chart that you can all see, there is an increased likelihood that more will be turning to drugs and alcohol as a way of coping with all the stresses that we've seen and the increased stress that staff are experiencing day to day. And this really highlights the need for why more companies need to be testing, more so now than potentially kind of ever before, really. So we also need to dispel this myth, okay? I'm sure if I asked you which month of the year are you most likely to be stopped for drink driving, most of you would say around Christmas time or maybe early January, okay? Statistics have shown us that you are as likely to be caught amongst other months of the year as you are the December. So dispelling this myth of we only need to drug or alcohol test around the Christmas period, okay? We need to ensure that we are doing testing throughout the year to make sure we can really reduce those incidences, crashes, whatever it might be that we're seeing within our workplace. So as we said, we're just going to spend some time as well talking about increases and has COVID impacted drug or alcohol abuse, okay, and how big a problem are we actually now seeing as a result of that? As I said, we start to kind of unwind away from that COVID. So Since the lockdown in March 2020, we have seen a 250% increase in drink drive convictions and 400% increase in drug drive convictions. Okay, so it's substantially greater as a problem. Maybe this is news to you, okay, but this is what we're seeing come across from the police and obviously the work that we do hand in hand with them. So a real crutch on our, UK. The statistics show that last year, 1 in 8 under 35s were using cannabis and 1 in 14 of all employees were too. So we're really looking at how does this impact us within businesses. Now, interestingly as well, 74% of all substance abusers are in full-time employment, suggesting that, management of substance misuse should be a priority for all employers. Okay, and it's quite naive to think that what we're seeing in societal issues isn't going to impact us in businesses and our day-to-day. Okay, as employers, we have to employ from society, and that's where a lot of the crossover comes in. So if I was to ask you this, and just spend some time thinking about it yourself. So do you know who the drug users are within your specific workplace? Okay, do you know who the alcohol abusers are? And you personally as an organization, what are you actually doing to combat that problem? Okay, so we might be aware, and some of you might be able to think of some people that could fall into that bracket, but are you actively doing anything as an organization to ensure that those people are not going to cause an accident or an incident within our workplace and put our other employees, but also the general public at risk as well? That's something you need to ask yourself. So what we've got is, are your processes currently fit for purpose? Okay. So here we have a couple of cases. So Wayne Wellington, a lorry driver, he took crack cocaine, heroin hours before falling asleep at the wheel, causing a crash which killed 2 men, has now been jailed. Okay, or Christopher Swain, a HGV driver who left 2 officers seriously hurt when he ploughed his HGV into the back of their stationary police car after smoking cannabis. Or Andrew Montgomery, a fisherman who was found to be high on cocaine and alcohol as well, which caused a crash which killed a father and seriously injured his teenage son. Okay, and I think it's very easy as companies and individuals to look at this and say, well, that's not going to impact me, it's not going to impact my organization. I'm sure all of these companies and individuals thought the exact same. And it's not down to these people wanting to go out and take drugs or alcohol and cause these incidents, but it's really a lack of awareness around impairment, especially from the drugs point of view. I'm sure many of you will have kind of grown up and being taught not to drink and drive, okay, things of that nature, having an awareness around alcohol and driving, okay, or alcohol in the workplace, but not the same for the drug side of things. And that's something that we really need to work on in sessions like this, and making sure the message is put out there clearly in terms of impairment, and making sure we're creating a safe workplace for all of our staff. So we're going to spend a bit more time very shortly looking at this, but kind of quick things that we're looking for. So messy dashboards, okay, scattered with rubbish. Does that remind you of any of your workers in company vehicles or plant machines, whatever it might be? And as we've already said, no employer believes that their driver or their worker has a substance problem, and regrettably it's often discovered post-incident when it's far too late. With the industry facing shortages of HGV drivers, which I'm sure you've all heard about, okay, maybe that's impacted you directly within your organization as well if you have your own drivers within that. But tackling the ongoing repercussions of COVID-19, it comes to no surprise that drug and alcohol testing has been pushed further down the priority list. So potentially you might have experienced this yourself within your organization, where previously we have done testing, but as a result of COVID-19 we've stepped back on that testing. However, something we need to remember is that, especially when people were furloughed, okay, things like that, people were furloughed, but health and safety wasn't. Okay, we need to make sure we're keeping up with our testing. Okay, and if you haven't been doing that, maybe as your your workers come back, even if it's some of your office staff to a hybrid working, whatever it might be, we're introducing some kind of introduction to work or reintroduction to work testing to make sure that what people have been getting up to over the past 2 years doesn't then leak into the workplace. Okay, and recent data shows that 23% of individuals have either started taking or increased taking, prescription drugs, illegal drugs, and alcohol, all as a direct result and correlation of COVID-19 pandemic. So something we need to be aware of as we're reintroducing that into the workplace. Okay, especially if you think about what people have been up to. Okay, they might have had kind of less responsibility, whether they've been furloughed or reduced hours. Okay, they don't have to be out and about in places or things like that, so they might have turned to drugs and alcohol on a more regular basis. So it's well known that our workers and drivers are feeling more undervalued and scrutinized than ever before. We've got things like the introduction of telematics, other technologies, performance indicators, whatever it might be, things that we implement as a business. However, in addition to that, we have new research from people like road safety charity Break and the insurer's direct line that shows that more than 1 in 10 employees have admitted to feeling stressed and angry each time they get behind the wheel or come to do their day job. So as an employer, how do you implement drug and alcohol testing into the workplace without exacerbating the already increased strain that we have on our drivers, employees, whether it's machine operators, your general safety critical staff that are feeling these pressures? And we'll talk about that in some detail shortly. So what we want to be looking at is, the immediate and next day effects of drink driving specifically, okay? And, they're kind of well known within our society, as we've already said. However, not many people know and understand the immediate and following day effects of drug driving. Therefore, education is absolutely key for awareness and to protect your workforce, okay? So we need to make sure we are understanding it as well as managers, higher managers, directors, things of that nature. If we don't understand it, we can't expect our staff to be understanding it. So we need to be driving this educational piece from the top downwards. As we said, most people are naive to the effects of drug and alcohol, even potentially the drug users themselves, which is something we've touched on very briefly. Okay, education is fundamental to a successful drug and alcohol screening program. So it's not just helping them with the policy as to say, this is what the rules of the organization are, but we want to be educating our staff as to why they shouldn't be taking certain substances, why it's impairing, and then obviously implement a detection as well. So if they don't listen to the above, that's when we're going to start to pick them up. And, even thinking yourselves, how many of you could confidently explain the effects of taking drugs and alcohol? I'm sure a lot of you could do the alcohol side of things, but what about drugs? And pictured there is some great free resources that ourselves and other companies will implement, which can be put in break rooms or even on the back of toilet stalls. So when people are sat on the toilet, instead of them looking at the phone, they can be reading great things like this. But also from a from a telltale sign, okay? Do some of your staff come forward with particular ailments? Okay, could they all be trigger points for thinking, okay, is there a drug or alcohol problem there? And these are great free resources to help highlight that. So let's look at drugs and their effects on obviously driving, but also specifically within the workplace as well. So we have different sections of drugs, and we're going to just spend some time on stimulants. So we have things like our amphetamines, our cocaine, our ecstasy, and what these do is speed up the activity of the central nervous system. So amphetamines are a group of drugs that increase the activity of certain chemicals in the brain and are classed as stimulants, as we've said. Some other names for amphetamines that you might have heard of are things like ice or speed, crystal meth, uppers, whiz, some kind of generic terms and kind of street names that are bandied about. Then we have cocaine, which is a powerfully addictive stimulant drug made from coca leaf. People abuse 2 chemical forms of this cocaine. So the water-soluble hydrochloride salt and the water-insoluble cocaine base, or it's sometimes called a free base. So the user injects or snorts the hydrochloride salt, which is powder form, which is what most people will think of as cocaine. However, the base form of cocaine is created by processing the drug with ammonia or sodium bicarbonate and water, and then heating it to remove that hydrochloride, which then produces a smokable substance, okay, which is termed crack cocaine. And that's the name for things like freebase cocaines, which refer to crackling sound heard when the mixture is smoked. That's why it's called crack cocaine. Then we have things like ecstasy. So this is a synthetic drug known primarily for its hallucinogenic and stimulant effects. It's known to impart feelings of things like increased energy, pleasure, emotional warmth, but also we look at distorted sensory and time perception. And in things, especially, you know, in some of your plant machines or vehicles, wagons, whatever it might be, the technology can help identify a potential problem. So we need to make sure we're looking at that in terms of telematics point of view. You know, a driver may drive very differently on the first day of their shift than the rest of the week. Okay, and are they because of drugs and alcohol and things of that nature? So again, something to potentially be looking at for yourselves when we're doing this day to day. Okay, so what we're seeing from these stimulant drugs is things like attention difficulties, which said increased speeding, aggressive and dangerous driving, increased risk taking, overconfidence in driving skills. Okay, all factors that are potential causations for a serious accident within the workplace, but also even just driving to and from work. Okay, we've all got loved ones on the road, so we need to help with this awareness around drug and alcohol and why, you know, taking these substances isn't good. Okay, the impairing effects and how that could impact the wider population, general public. Okay, we need to make sure we are protecting our organization's image and the public image, as well as looking after our primary assets, such as our staff. So now we're going to spend some time just talking about depressants. Obviously, alcohol being one of the biggest depressants. We're not going to spend too much time on that. Obviously, I'm sure all of you, if not majority of you, will have consumed alcohol at one point or another, so understand the impairing effects of that. However, then we have things like cannabis. So the biggest drug taken in the UK. And that comes down to a group of 3 plants with psychoactive properties. So they're known as cannabis sativa, cannabis indica, and cannabis ruderalis. Okay, so they're the 3 forms of cannabis plants that are used. When the flowers of these plants are harvested and dried out, we'll get left with one of the most common drugs in the world, which is what you would have seen potentially at one point or another on the TV or news or personal experience. Okay, you probably smelt it at some point or another. So some people will call it weed. It's also called pot, marijuana, okay, skunk, all things of this nature. Then we have things like heroin. So heroin is an opiate-based drug made from morphine, which is a natural substance that's taken from the seed pod of various opium poppy plants, which grow in places like Southeast and Southwest Asia. They also grow in Mexico and Colombia and places like that. So it can be seen in white powder or brown powder, or we can see a resin-based substance as well. So a black sticky substance known as black tar heroin. And, you know, kind of other common names for heroin include Big H or horse or hell dust, or even smack, which some of you might have heard as well. So again, trigger signs, if you hear any of those being bandied about within your workplace, that's what's being referred to. And again, something that might cause an investigation from that point of view. In terms of the depressant drugs, we're looking at things like reduced concentration, difficulty processing information, difficulty multitasking, drowsiness, fatigue. Okay, so are we seeing a staff member that is potentially drowsier than usual or fatigued, or it's taking them a while to process the conversation with you or tasks that you ask them to do? Could they all be kind of factors that we'll need to investigate because it could be down to drugs or alcohol? Then we have things like hallucinogenic drugs, so including that is things like ketamine, which is widely used by medical practitioners and vets as anesthetic. So a lot of you will probably know that that is a horse tranquilizer by nature. Okay, people have decided to start taking that as well in what you'd call a key. So we then have things like LSD, which is a synthetic chemical made from a substance found in the ergo, which is a fungus that affects ryegrain. So again, as humans, we've decided that that would be a good thing to consume. Okay, then we have things like magic mushrooms, which are, you know, wild mushrooms that are cultivated, and they contain different chemicals, such as naturally occurring psychoactives, and also hallucinogenic compounds as well. And then we have things like mescaline, which is a hallucinogenic that comes from a button-shaped seed, which is found in the pyocactus. Again, All of these will do exactly what it says in terms of hallucinations, but it will distort a person's perception of reality. Again, not ideal in a workplace when we start having hallucinations, alter perception of speed from a driving point of view, confused thinking, blurred vision, reduced coordination, all things of that nature, again, which could be trigger signs for you to know that we need to be investigating something from a point of view for drug and alcohol to increase our safety in the workplace. And we move on. So we're just going to spend a very brief time talking about the alcohol side of things. So should we be driving the morning after? Okay, so what we need to work out is our units. So we multiply the amount of in milliliters times by our strength, then divide that by 1,000. So for a standard glass of wine at 175 ml, 12.5% wine in terms of the alcohol unit, alcohol percentage, sorry. So that's 12.5 times by 175 divided by 1,000 is 2.18 units. Okay, then on top of that, we want to be adding an hour as well. And this should be our minimum time to allow before driving once we're consuming alcohol. And we also have to remember as well, on top of that, it takes 30 minutes to absorb the alcohol. So from that point, we also want to be making sure that we are allowing time for alcohol absorption and not just consumption of that alcohol. And then 1 hour to get rid of units following that. So obviously when these slides are pushed out following this, you can use this as a nice little gauge and something to help educate your staff on. So when we're looking at staff protection, we need to make sure that we are identifying, educating and supporting. So what is best practice within the business? Well, this is just a question for you all to kind of go away and answer. You know, what measures do you have in place to identify, educate and support your employees? Do you have something in place, whether it's policy, educational support, okay, aftercare, okay, or that supporting mechanism that if someone comes forward and says, I've got a genuine problem, can we support them as a business? Are you doing enough to actually identify these, you know, and educate? So have we got it in place, but are we doing enough? Do we need more in place? And what can you be doing better to educate and support your employees? And we'll talk about some best practice as well very shortly. So some trigger points to consider and potential things that, you know, might be causations for you. Obviously, we said, you know, litter being a big one, but things like bareness of tires or, you know, not looking after vehicles, whether it be company vehicles or their own. Okay, are these all trigger points? Okay, bridge strikes, things of that nature. Okay, all indicators that could you know, improper health and safety. So on the top right, okay, just tying stuff down incorrectly, things of that nature that we all could be, you know, picking up on within the workplace and helping our managers identify these and pick up for potential concerns or causes to be investigating. In terms of spotting the signs, it's all about prevention. So first and foremost, you need to be engaging as often as you can. It makes it easier to notice a change in behavior. And yourselves as managers and higher managers, we're the people that see our staff day to day. So we need to be taking time at the start of a shift or at the end of the shift where possible to engage in those conversations with your employees and ask those questions. Okay, are you feeling okay today? Are you feeling fit to drive? Are you feeling fit to operate heavy machinery? Things of this nature. Okay, so that we are really setting a standard. They'll then be asking the question to themselves. Okay, well, maybe I'm not. Okay, maybe I am feeling a bit tired or drowsy today. Okay, so even from a personal well-being point of view, not just drug or alcohol. Then great signs such as appearance, punctuality. Okay, is someone normally always on time and they've started now turning up late, or in their appearance they're normally dressed very smartly, or as you know, wearing your company uniform perfectly, but now they've started not washing their shoes, not cleaning their shoes, or the tie looks messy, or the high-vis jacket is creased, okay, because they've just been thrown it in the back of the van. Things that usually indicate changes to circumstance in one way or another. Could that be because of drugs or alcohol? You know, minor mistakes. Okay, so some of you might have some implementations where it has to reach a certain level before drugs and alcohol is investigated. But what about all those minor mistakes? I was working with a company a couple of weeks ago where an individual had 5 minor crashes, so hitting a lamppost or scratching a car. Okay, stuff that the company considered minor mistakes. Okay, but why are we having 5 within a week? Okay, there's something causing that. whether it's drugs or alcohol or personal circumstance, but we need to be investigating that. So a lot of them are often caused by a lack of concentration, fatigue, and it's a great opportunity to ask more questions and try and get to the root cause of that. You know, it can help prevent something more serious happening in the future and really looking to be preventative rather than investigative. So if someone misuses drugs or alcohol, they may exhibit numerous physical signs of drugs abuse. And some of these signs are, you know, readily apparent while others are hidden, disguised, or, you know, occur gradually as changes. So, for example, some things like a frequently runny nose is a telltale sign that person might be taking cocaine, or tremors and seizures can be a commonplace with ecstasy and amphetamine users. Changing to eating habits often looks at depressant groups, or is this one where we would see the users have appetite suppression and then obviously would lose weight? Could that be because of depressant groups? Naturally, as these drugs are all obviously then stimulants as well, when we're looking at certain drugs, they won't be able to keep still. It's very hard for that user to do things like methamphetamines. You know, it might cause bad breath and give off particular odors. And again, as these are all stimulants, they tend to cause a dilation of the pupils and things of that nature. So they're all telltale signs that we need to be training our employees on and our managers and things of that nature, so we can help identify some of these telltale signs, rather than it just being, okay, that person smells of cannabis, which I'm sure you'd all be able to identify. But what are those? What can we do as a bit more on top of that? So again, back to that question, are you doing enough as an organization to make sure that we have something like this in place, or could you be doing more? And it's well known that our you know, a kind of industry is on its way back from COVID and things like that, but we need to be making sure that when we're looking at our drug and alcohol policy, we are implementing it in the correct way. And as we've already said, you know, 74% of substance abusers are in full-time employment. So that suggests that the management of substance misuse should be a priority. So are we looking at policy and that side of things? So it can be short or long, detailed, brief, but it shouldn't be open to interpretation. Okay, it should be definitive in what it states and clear with what it states. It should obviously be given to all new employees at induction. Is your policy up to date? And that's something you can go away and have a look at. Okay, or was it last revised in 2017? And it's never a one and done exercise. We need to be continually reviewing that and making sure it's up to date and fit for purpose. And you know, what type of testing are we going to be doing? What percentage should we be doing? 50% random? We should be stating all these things in our policy. And if it's introduced to current employees, we should be looking to have a notice period with them, or if you want to call it a consultation window, consultation period, a minimum of 30 days to make sure that if someone has concerns or issues, they can come forward and talk to us about them. And then obviously once that is then implemented, it gets circulated and signed off by everybody. So we're just going to talk about kind of best practice very briefly as we look to finish up. So in terms of what is best practice within the workplace, and again, you can be asking this of yourself, and what do we currently have within the business? Okay, there might be some things you have, but not everything. So can we be doing more? So first and foremost, we need credibility. So for example, is your device home office approved? Okay, is it there as a test and certification process offered by the home office to enable police specification equipment to be used? Okay, is it capable? Okay, your drug screening solution should be able to accurately screen for the UK's most prevalent illegal drugs. Okay, so not 10 drugs that we only see 3 of them in the UK, for example, and the rest are seen in America. Does it keep dignity? We should look to preserve the dignity of the innocent majority of our staff, and we should always be looking to utilize a drug screening solution which obtains a sample quickly. It's non-invasive and non-intrusive for your staff. Also, is it an efficient device? Your drug screening solution should facilitate quick, efficient, and reliable results. And access to an immediate screening result should help you to avoid a lengthy and potentially costly process as well. So that, I guess, brings us on to the next one of portability. So is your drug screening solution practical? Is it non-invasive screening that enables you to screen on or off site? Okay, and at short notice as well, or potentially even at the roadside. As we said, if any of you obviously have those HGV or even grey fleet, whatever it might be, and this will ensure flexibility for pre-employment screening as well. but also random screening, post-incident investigations, everything that you need to do within your policy. Does your current testing method allow for that as well? It should be, standalone as well, ideally, rather than having a reader that you have to carry around as well. Is your device reliable? You should ensure that the sample is being taken from an area of the body which has a reduced risk of cross-contamination. So, for example, you want to avoid places like hands, okay, because that's what touches everything and could cause contamination. It should also be able to differentiate between what we call consumption, so has that person consumed that substance, and contamination. Can your device differentiate between the two? If not, then maybe it's not fit for purpose. Then we have responsibility. So CIPD and IOSH state that organizations shouldn't screen without first educating their employees on the dangers of working whilst under the influence of drugs and alcohol. And I know that's something that HSE have now come out and said as well. You should be doing education as a minimum. And your drug screening provider should therefore be able to offer a drug and alcohol awareness training program for all of your employers. Obviously something you're sitting in on, obviously within the institute. Okay, great things that can be done to help educate our staff with great resources like this. Then we have accountability. So your supplier should be able to provide you with a full spectrum solution that looks at, policy development, liaison with union reps, training programs or detection methods, detailed management information, trend analysis, which allows you to obviously look at your solution and scale it appropriately to your organization. So what is going to happen afterwards? After the implementation, are we working, and can your current provider, if you have one, work with you to help reduce those incidents year on year and those positives that we're seeing come out? Then we're just going to spend finally just a quick moment just looking at and making sure people understand what could happen and what are the potential complications and consequences for your personal life, but also the business life as well. So we have things like prosecution, whether that's fines or points or a ban, imprisonment, and both of those can be seen as well for the business, which we'll talk about in a moment. But disciplinary, okay, this is what your staff should be thinking about as the process and what could happen: loss of job, insurance restrictions or refusal, and that is on your personal license, not just your work license. So if you're operating a work vehicle, that affects your personal license as well, so you can be refused insurance. Relationship issues, okay, could you losing your job impact all of those things you don't think of? Obviously financial problems, your mortgage, okay, less likely to be accepted from a mortgage. Can you live with your action? So if, for example, some of those cases where there's been fatalities, okay, could you live with killing that father of that young boy? Okay, then there's the travel restrictions. Okay, so some countries you can't actually travel to with a criminal record, and that's something that, again, people aren't aware of. Then we look at the business side of things. So public image, your brand representation. Okay, so if someone stumbles in to work in the morning, they don't care about who that person is. They care it's that particular company's employee. So it's the company image, not that person. Closes to businesses or insurance restrictions or refusals from the business point of view as well. So it will affect your overall premium as a company. So you need to make sure we're doing something. Prosecution, you could be convicted for a proportion of that blame if you don't have an active drug and alcohol solution in place. If someone does go and cause a serious incident, that comes back on the company. Loss of O license, something we need to look at if you have one. Imprisonment for obviously directors, again, if we're not being seen to have done enough as a company, transport managers, things of that nature, we could also be seeing those fines come across as well. Remedial orders, publicity orders, things like that. Okay, all factors that we need to be aware of as potential consequences from not correctly implementing a drug and alcohol solution. So that's going to finish me up about just on time. So I'm going to leave my details up there. And I know that we're looking at a kind of a question section towards the end. So if you do have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or pop up. And I know Louise will have a look at the chat box and kind of mediate them. But I will leave my details up there. So if you want to contact me to ask any questions that you don't want to ask now in this kind of setting, in this forum, please feel free to contact me, whether that's from an educational point of view. We have loads of great free resources. If you just want to know more about any particular topics, or obviously discuss about what actions and we can help you with in terms of policy, education, and then obviously deterrent as well, building in that detection side of things, actually implementation, and then post-implementation support that we offer. So thank you everyone for listening, and that's me done.
Does anyone have any questions for Daniel? No? Okay. Well, it's just a case of giving you a quick vote of thanks, Daniel. Daniel, that was a very interesting topic for discussion. The statistics which relate to what's happened after the pandemic is really alarming. People, an increase of possibly 23% new percent of the population now taking drugs which weren't previously, or taking an increased prescribed drug. And also the statistics about 1 in 8 of under 35ers using cannabis, and 1 in 14 of all employees within the workplace. If the statistics are representative of the whole of the UK and all industries, then it could be a bit of a problem for all employers. We went on to talk about stimulants, depressants and hallucinants, and how they affect the individual's performance, and how to address whether we should be driving the morning after, and also about how we screen and the type of equipment and the capability of the equipment, and then about the policy, what we should have as a policy as an employers. So on behalf of the Institute, I would like to thank you for your presentation, Daniel. Thank you.